Hi and welcome, I'm Andy Miocha and you are watching A News. Here are the headlines. NATO Secretary General reiterates unwavering support for Ukraine during surprise visit to Odessa. Donald Trump considers pausing his car tariffs, plans to impose new ones on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. Baku Iniative Group addresses UN's Forum on People of African Descent in New York. Thank you for tuning in. NATO's support for Ukraine remains unwavering, said the alliance's Secretary General Mark Rutte during an unannounced trip to Odessa, where he met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The two visited wounded soldiers recovering in a local hospital. Rutte said he reassured Zelensky that NATO would continue to help Ukraine so it can defend today and deter future aggression. NATO Secretary General also spoke to the Ukrainian president about the, quote, important talks that US President Donald Trump is leading with Ukraine, as well as with Russia, to try to end the war and secure a durable peace.
Today, Mark Rutte and I devoted a significant part of the conversation to relations with the United States of America, and also to the efforts of the American side to negotiate with Russia. For 35 days now, Putin has been ignoring the American proposal for a complete ceasefire.
These discussions are not easy, not least in the wake of this horrific violence. But we all support President Trump's push for peace. Other allies, including through efforts led by France and the United Kingdom, are ready, willing and able to shoulder more responsibility in helping to secure peace when the time comes.
The US has blocked a joint G7 statement condemning Russia's recent missile strike on the Ukrainian city of Sumy, according to Bloomberg. The Trump administration reportedly refused to endorse the draft, saying it wanted to keep diplomatic space open for possible peace talks. Canada, which holds the G7 presidency, said a statement without US support would carry little weight. The draft had labeled the strike further proof of Russia's intent to prolong the war. Joining us from Chicago to briefly discuss the latest surrounding the war in Ukraine is Alik Kasman, Director of Protect Ukraine Now. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us. We've seen a surprise trip by the NATO Secretary General to Odessa. Rutte said NATO's support remains unwavering. How much would you say that the entire alliance is devoted to standing with Ukraine?
Well, I would certainly feel much better if the unwavering support would have come with extra Patriot systems or another air defense. Ukraine could also greatly benefit if Europe would immediately invest into their drone manufacturing. As we have seen from many examples, drones are really very significant on the battlefield. They are responsible for 70 to 80% of Russian losses. So that sort of material investment would be much more helpful to Ukraine than continuous reassurances of support.
Well, almost at the same time as Rutte was in Odessa, the US reportedly barred a joint statement by the G7 to condemn the Russian attack on Sumy that killed 35 people in the interest of peace talks. We've heard US envoy Steve Witkoff mentioning 5 territories as part of a peace plan taking shape after his meeting with Vladimir Putin. What do you make of Washington's latest steps?
Unfortunately, President Trump is attempting to hammer a square peg into a round hole. This is just not going to work. There's a very significant difference in positions between Russia and Ukraine. President Putin wants to completely eliminate Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian ability to defend itself, and of course, annex territories. Ukraine is not going to accept any of these terms. And until President Trump understands that the only path forward is for Russia to change their objectives and that pass can be only achieved through strength. Ukraine needs to be equipped to the teeth. Ukraine needs to be in a position to stop Russia from advancing forward. When we are in that position, Ukraine and Russia will be able to negotiate the ceasefire deal. Putin will continue push forward until he's able to push forward.
Well, Alec, thank you so much for joining us. The European Union's sanctions on Russia are up for renewal in July, but there is concern in Brussels over Hungary's potential veto. EU officials are looking for ways to get around a possible no from Budapest. Pablo Gutierrez brings more from Brussels.
Every 6 months since the war in Ukraine began, the EU votes on whether to maintain its sanctions on Russia. In July, the latest deadline arrives, and once again, Hungary has signaled it may say no. The Hungarian government has been critical of the sanctions on Moscow since they were first imposed. Budapest threatened to withhold approval during the last two renewals, but then agreed to vote in favor after obtaining concessions from the EU. But for this 17th round of sanctions, Brussels is worried it won't be so easy this time. Sanctions come in two parts: bans on Russian goods like gas and steel, and a list of more than 2,500 Russians banned from the European Union. All 27 countries need to agree to extend both. Legal experts here in Brussels say there is a possible way to get the sanctions in place, even if Hungary vetoes them. EU officials say there is a loophole that may allow the current package of sanctions to remain in place without the need to get them approved by all EU member states. Another option is to offer Hungary a deal, for example, agreeing not to impose new sanctions, rather only propose an extension of the current restrictions on Russia, or even replace the current sanctions with higher tariffs on Russian products. There is also the controversial option of stripping Hungary of its voting rights in the European Council if it refuses to support the EU's pressure campaign on Moscow. All of this comes as the EU continues and hopes to bring the Ukraine into the EU, give it EU membership. Another move Hungary might block. Pablo Gutierrez for A News in Brussels.
Russia has launched a fresh wave of strikes on the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy late Monday. This comes just a day after a missile attack killed 35 people in Sumy and injured more than 100, according to Ukrainian officials. Russia said its first attack on Sunday targeted a meeting of military officers.
Lying in a hospital bed in Sumy lies 13-year-old Kyrylo Ilyashenko, who is hailed as a hero by Ukraine's interior minister. It's after he saved lives during one of the deadliest missile strikes in recent months that killed 35 people and injured more than 100, according to officials. Kyrylo and his mother told Ihor Klimenko they were on a crowded bus Sunday morning, heading to sports training, when a Russian ballistic missile struck near their vehicle. The explosion turned their ride into a scene of chaos and bloodshed.
It all happened so fast. The glass shattered into my face. I was covered in blood. I shouted, "Kiryusha, where are you?" We touched each other, but we couldn't see.
His mother says he forced open a damaged bus door with her help and began pulling survivors from the wreckage.
I first tried to open the door by myself, and then my mother helped me to open the door.
How many people were on the bus?
It was full. There were a lot of people.
Around 40.
Yes.
Moments after that missile struck, paramedic Artem Selyanin grabbed his medical kit and rushed to help the wounded. But on Monday, he was caught on the staircase of the residential building where he lives with his family during the second strike on Monday.
I was running from one wounded person to another. It was emotionally exhausting. And doing triage, deciding who needs help first, I was lost. I had to come back because I ran out of tourniquets. I ran out of thermal blankets. We used them to cover the dead. There were many dead and we had nothing else to use. I used every blanket in my backpack and medical kit.
The Ukrainian Air Force reported that a new wave of missiles and guided bombs hit Sumy within minutes of each other. Local authorities said there were no immediate reports of casualties. Russia's defense ministry claimed responsibility, and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov alleged that Ukrainian officials were meeting Western counterparts in the town, though no evidence was provided. The US and European leaders swiftly condemned Sunday's attack. Ukrainian officials says the renewed attacks prove Russia is not serious about peace. The United Nations estimates that more than 12,000 civilians have been killed since Russia's full-scale invasion began in 2022. The latest assault on Sumy has once again drawn global attention to the human toll of a war now entering its fourth year.
The Trump administration is exploring options and probing into imports of pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. U.S. President has earlier made it known he seeks to impose tariffs on both sectors.
Semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are the next products to have increased U.S. tariffs imposed on them. President Donald Trump says it's part of a broader economic strategy to reshape U.S. trade priorities. The increases are designed to stimulate domestic manufacturing.
We don't make our own drugs, our own pharmaceuticals. We don't make our own drugs anymore. The drug companies are in Ireland and they're in lots of other places, China. And all I have to do is impose a tariff. The more, the faster they move in. The higher the tariff, is very simple. It's inversely proportional. The higher the tariff, the faster they come.
Do you have a percentage in mind and a timeline?
I have a timeline, yeah, not too distant future. We're doing it because we want to make our own drugs.
Earlier in week, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that smartphones, computers, and some other electronics will come under separate tariffs, saying all these sectors are critical to American security. And now the list includes pharmaceuticals and semiconductors.
So all those products are going to come under semiconductors, and they're going to have a special focused type of tariff to make sure that those products get reshored. We need to have semiconductors, we need to have chips, and we need to have flat panels. We need to have these things made in America. We can't be reliant on Southeast Asia for all of the things that operate for us. So what he's doing is he's saying they're exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, but they're included in the semiconductor tariffs, which are coming in probably a month or two. So these are coming soon.
Meanwhile, Trump says he's contemplating a temporary pause on tariffs affecting the auto industry, which was a 25% duty introduced earlier this year. Trump's decision signals a more cautious stance as the administration strives to balance and reinforce key sectors while mitigating negative impacts on the auto industry. The US is now preparing to impose these new trade restrictions on high-tech and health sectors, while the auto sector awaits further clarity on the future of its tariffs.
South Korea is stepping up support for its semiconductor industry with a $23 billion package. Seoul is citing growing pressure from the Chinese competition and uncertainty over possible US tariffs on chips.
South Korea announced a major boost to its semiconductor industry support, raising the total package to more than $23 billion. The move comes amid rising competition from China and growing concern over US trade policy, including potential tariffs on imported chips. While some stocks, such as those tied to exempted products, saw a temporary lift, overall investor sentiment remains cautious. Taiwan is already simulating the possible impact on its chip makers, including TSMC, while Malaysia is assessing how additional levies might disrupt its $16 billion chip export sector. Meanwhile, Advanced Micro Devices, better known as AMD, says it's ready to begin chip production at a new facility in Arizona. The organization is a leading US company that designs the processors powering everything from laptops and gaming consoles to data centers. But like many US firms, it relies heavily on chip manufacturing in Taiwan. The company says it's working closely with partners to manage any supply chain risks. Semiconductors, often called the brains of modern electronics, are essential to nearly every modern device, from smartphones and laptops to cars, medical equipment and power systems. They are produced through a complex global supply chain. The US designs many of them, but much of the manufacturing happens overseas, especially in Asia. Trump's proposed tariffs are meant to encourage domestic production, but critics warn they could raise costs, delay deliveries and strain international trade.
Donald Trump said he believes Iran is intentionally delaying a nuclear deal with the United States. He warned Tehran to abandon any drive for a nuclear weapon or face military strikes on nuclear facilities. The White House has, however, described the indirect talks with Iranians as positive and constructive. The second round of talks is set for Saturday in Rome, and sources say it will aim to establish a general negotiating framework.
I want them to be a rich, great nation. The only thing is, one thing, simple. It's really simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon. And they got to go fast, because they're fairly close to having one. And they're not going to have one. And if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it. And I'm not doing it for us, I'm doing it for the world.
The UN says more than 300 civilians have been killed in Sudan in just 2 days as the RSF fighters attacked displaced people camps in the Darfur region. Homes, health facilities and markets were destroyed. Aid workers and children are among the dead. The now 2-year-old war shows no signs of ending. Naba Muhyiddin reports from Port Sudan.
According to the governor of Darfur region, at least 450 people got killed and dozens injured in the recent attack on Zamzam camp, northern Darfur, in Al-Fashir. It's not the first time that Zamzam is attacked by the RSF, but it's one of the worst attacks since the war erupted in April 2023 and since Al-Fashir was besieged by RSF in May 2024. RSF has denied all of the accusations and said militants and rebel groups were using Zamzam to fuel weapons and to fuel it with weapons and to make a weapon flow into their militants and supporters. But all of these accusations were denied by the military and the international groups and blocs which condemned the attack on civilians. The victims include women, children and medical staff who have been helping hundreds of thousands of families, not only the displaced people from April's 2023 war, but Zamzam is one of the main camps in the country, especially in Darfur, that has been hosting hundreds of thousands of families since the war erupted in Darfur in 2003 between Arab and non-Arab groups. The situation is beyond dire, and there is a mounting calls by international blocs to end the besiege of Al-Fashir and to end the hostilities, but RSF are not adhering to the mounting calls, and the military is defending Al-Fashir as it's the last stronghold for the army in Darfur region.
Algeria has expelled 12 French diplomats from the country, citing a breach of diplomatic norms by French authorities. The move comes after France arrested an Algerian consular official in Paris last week, as well as 2 other Algerian nationals. They're accused of allegedly kidnapping a social media influencer and critic of the Algerian government who was granted asylum in France in 2023. Algiers has long criticized Paris for refusing to extradite him. Several prisons across France were attacked, with weapons being fired and vehicles set on fire, according to the country's justice ministry. On Monday night, the entrance to a prison in Toulon was shot at with an automatic weapon, while vehicles were torched in parking lots of several prisons. The French justice minister called the attacks an intimidation attempt, following the government's launch of a new campaign against drug trafficking in the country that aims to tackle rising gang violence and deaths linked to growing cocaine imports. France's anti-terrorism office has launched an investigation. We now go live to the United Nations in New York, where a conference on decolonization is underway. The event, organized by the Baku Iniative Group, gathered diplomats, experts, activists, and indigenous leaders to talk on the legacy of colonialism as well as the paths to sovereignty for still affected regions. Our Ubay Shahbender is at the UN. Ubay, what are the main highlights? What could you see throughout the day?
Decolonization, a silent revolution. That was the main theme of an international conference hosted by the Baku Iniative Group that brought activists and human rights defenders from indigenous people seeking to end the legacy of colonialism from the South Pacific, such as the island of New Caledonia, with representatives at this conference discussing their efforts to gain their people's independence and freedom after decades of French colonial rule. We also heard from indigenous activists from the Caribbean, including from the island of Bonaire, which is controlled by the Netherlands, where one activist told me that we must reclaim our pride and our identity with a purpose. That was an indigenous activist who was standing up against what they view to be an unfair Dutch rule over their people in the Caribbean. And they want to reclaim their indigenous language and not only be forced to speak the language of their colonial ruler. We also spoke with a number of activists from New Caledonia. The leader of the independence movement of that island in the South Pacific remains held as, with many calling him a political prisoner in a French jail. The activists that we spoke with from the indigenous Kanak people of New Caledonia told me that they want to see him freed in order for their people to gain their freedom and independence, and that might take place sometime in the coming fall. So this initiative hosted by the Baku Iniative Group was meant to bring activists from the South Pacific to West Africa. Countries such as Mali were present, a country that has had suffered under decades of French colonial rule and recently forced the French military forces to leave their country, as well as Latin America. So the activists told me that this was an opportunity to have their voice heard on the international stage here in the headquarters of the United Nations.
Ubay, what sort of a feeling did you get when you spoke to them? Do they feel that their struggles with colonialism, neocolonialism, its legacies are being more heard recently? You've mentioned the organizer, the Baku Iniative Group. Do they feel that their struggle is being televised more in recent years?
Certainly there has been an effort for these indigenous peoples from New Caledonia as well as the Caribbean islands under French and Dutch rule. There's been a sustained momentum for these indigenous activists to gain their independence and freedom. And what they told me was that forums like the Baku Iniative Group and conferences like the one held in the United Nations today amplifies those voices. Just to give you an idea of what was discussed, one of the organizers also produced and were distributing this book called The Evolution of French Colonialism, a Political and Constitutional Analysis. And books like this and educational material like this is being distributed and meant to educate the broader international community, not only the legacy of colonialism that still impacts indigenous people in New Caledonia and islands like Aruba and Saint Martin, but the fact that countries like France still control colonial territories whose people are seeking self-rule and sovereignty. And that we saw last year, the French military cracking down against peaceful activists, but the activists that we met today from New Caledonia told me that they will not be deterred and they will have their voices heard, and they believe that freedom for their people will happen one day.
Earlier at the fourth session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent in New York, the executive director of the Baku Iniative Group, Abbas Abbasov, said many African people are not getting their basic universal rights realized. The week-long session highlights global calls for reparations for the historical legacies of enslavement and colonialism. Abbasov said the Baku Iniative Group is consistently supporting nations fighting colonial and neo-colonial oppression.
Inclusive and respectful of human rights. Thank you very much for your attention. The right of life, liberty, equality, cultural identity and decolonization, these are not privileges. They are universal human rights enshrined in the United Nations Charter, the Bandung Principles of the Non-Alignment Movement, and in many other international documents. Yet for many African nations and people of African descent around the world, these rights remain aspirational rather than realized. For the last 2 years, our organization has been the organizer of around 30 international conferences. The above-mentioned negative impact of the legacies of colonialism is a main topic of our events, which bring together representatives and leaders of independence movements, decolonization experts, and researchers from Guadeloupe, Martinique, Bonaire, Saint Martin, Kanaki, Maui Nui, French Guiana, Réunion, Mayotte, Corsica, and others still suffering from the colonial policy.
Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry has sharply criticized the recent comments by French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot about the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process. Barrot had said that the tensions increased at the border between the two nations. Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry spokesperson says the remarks show double standards. He accused France of supplying arms to Armenia and rejected French criticism of legal proceedings of the peace process, calling it interference in domestic affairs. He further accused France of pursuing a neo-colonial agenda that undermines international stability. Armenia says it's ready to sign a peace agreement with Azerbaijan and supports the simultaneous dissolution of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe's Minsk Group. That's according to Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who made a speech at the parliamentary session on Tuesday. Pashinyan said that if the Karabakh conflict is considered resolved, the group's format is no longer necessary. He also dismissed Azerbaijan's demand to amend Armenia's constitution, referencing a constitutional court ruling that found no territorial claims against Azerbaijan in the current text. Pashinyan said that both nations deserve peace. Joining us to discuss what we heard in Armenia's parliament is Murad Muradov, co-founder of the Topchubashev Center in Baku. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Pashinyan said he understands Baku's arguments and that the Minsk group is not necessary if the conflict is resolved, as that was the reason for its existence. However, he also said that they want to ensure that Azerbaijan does not see this step as shifting the conflict from its own territory to Armenia. What would you say he meant by that?
Good evening. So glad to be here. I believe that in his statements, Pashinyan in general, he's always trying to, at the same time to sound compromising and cooperative to Azerbaijan, but also at the same time to avoid as possible accusations of being kind of like treacherous in Armenia, which have been raised by the opposition basically since 2020, and you know many opposition parties in Armenia accused him of being too soft on Azerbaijan and also to compromising the national security. So I was seeing this remark as rather an attempt to soothe, at least partly, this revolutionary segment of Armenian society, which of course is quite big. And also, like most many Armenian experts, for example, when they would raise their concerns about the dissolution of Minsk Group, they would say that it remains the only international body officially sanctioned to deal with the conflict. And in their opinion, so yeah, if something happens to on the territory of Armenia per se, then the absence of this group can be a problem for Armenia. Of course, for me, in my opinion, it's mostly a pretext to freeze the situation and also to let this group remain, although in lethargy, but still. But I think it's the first time when Pashinyan so openly admitted his readiness to basically put an end to this obsolete body.
Well, concerning the amendments to the Armenian constitution, Pashinyan rejects the request and says it's unfounded. What do you think Baku would make of that?
I also heard this opinion many times from Armenian experts and journalists who would claim that the verdict of the Constitutional Court of Armenia is enough to persuade Baku about the absence of any religious ambitions in Armenia. As you may know, this verdict made last year basically declared the preamble of the Constitution, which also refers to the recognition of Karabakh as part of Armenia, as null and void. And the problem is, and also they would continue to say that the verdicts of the Constitutional Court of Armenia are cancelable, and once they're made, they cannot be taken back. The problem with this thinking is that whatever the verdict is, still the Constitution remains the integral part of the national political identity, and of course, any group which in future would like to, let's say, raise the issue of Karabakh again, will refer to it and can also demean Pashinyan's government if, for example, if this government really signs peace agreement by basically accusing them of violating its constitution. And of course, I still agree that there is no, let's say, absolute guarantees on the ground. I mean, and no document, I think, as we have witnessed many times from what's going on in global politics, no document can absolutely guarantee, say, the from, let's say, future attempts to reignite the tensions. Still, if we achieve the constitutional acknowledgement that Armenian official ambitions of Karabakh are over, then it will make any kind of this attempts in future legally and void, and also lacking legitimacy, which I think is still very important. And I assume Pashinyan also understands this, but as we also witnessed in a few instances, I mean,
well, Murad, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. We're moving on, but we're still staying close. Russia has recently said that it's willing to restore ties with Georgia. However, Tbilisi stands firm on its demand for Russian troops to withdraw from occupied Georgian territories. Our Nini Nikolaishvili has more.
Georgian President Mikhail Avalashvili has chosen Baku for his first official foreign visit, an important signal of continued strong relations between Georgia and Azerbaijan. His visit comes as regional attention turns to Georgia on its complicated relationship with Russia. Russia recently expressed willingness to restore ties with Georgia, with Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin saying that Moscow is ready to move forward if Tbilisi is ready to. Galuzin claimed that the break in relations was initiated by the previous Georgian government after the 2008 war and referred to what he calls reasonable statement regarding reconciliation with Abkhazia and South Ossetia. He reaffirmed that Russia's recognition of their independence is final, but emphasized that Moscow is ready to develop cooperation with Tbilisi across trade, energy, and humanitarian sector. Tbilisi, however, rejected the overture, stating that the normalization is impossible while Russian forces occupy the Georgian territory. Foreign Minister Makavachorishvili and Parliament Speaker Shalva Papuashvili both stressed that Russia must first end its occupation. The Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze added that Georgia remains committed to peaceful and pragmatic stance, but the issue of territorial integrity remains a key obstacle. It's Nina Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, News.
Over in Tashkent, an international conference was held with a focus on deepening of economic and trade ties within the Organization of Turkic States.
Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan, became the center of strategic dialogue on Monday. Leading scholars, economists and policymakers from the Organization of Turkic States convened for a high-level conference themed Expanding Trade Potential Among the Countries of the OTS, Joint Research and Strategic Solutions. The event, organized by Uzbekistan's Center for Economic Research and Reforms in collaboration with the Organization of the Turkic State Secretariat, stems from an initiative proposed by President Shavkat Mirziyoyev during the 11th OTS summit in Bishkek last November. The primary goal of the conference is to enhance trade and economic cooperation among OTS countries through targeted research and actionable strategies. Discussions centered on key issues such as removing trade barriers, streamlining customs procedures, and developing digital trade platforms. The OTS Deputy Secretary General Merey Mukasyan highlighted the bloc's substantial collective market of 175 million people and its growing global influence. He said that major steps have already been taken to foster economic unity, including the establishment of the Union of Turkish Chambers of Commerce and Industry and the Turkish Investment Fund. He also unveiled plans for a new Turan Special Economic Zone to be created in Kazakhstan's Turkestan region, seen as a key part of the strategic Middle Corridor. It could transform the region into a vital transport and logistics hub. Throughout the day, participants delved into a range of pressing topics, from untapped trade opportunities and digital innovation to sustainable development, regional infrastructure, and the green economy. Experts also addressed pressing socio-demographic challenges facing the Turkic world.
Regulators from 9 countries gathered in Baku for the 11th meeting of the Black Sea Broadcasting Regulatory Authorities Forum. The event focused on protecting children in the rapidly evolving digital media space.
The forum, hosted by Azerbaijan's Audiovisual Council, brought together more than 30 officials from regulatory bodies of countries including Turkey, Romania, Albania and Georgia. The central topic: strengthening legal and institutional mechanisms to protect minors from harmful media content, especially online. Chairman of the Audiovisual Council of Azerbaijan, Ismat Sattarov, expressed his belief that through the joint efforts of the institutions, progress will be attained in this area. The participation of regional and international experts gave the forum a comprehensive perspective.
The issue of protecting children's rights in audiovisual media is being addressed in a fresh format. Presentations were delivered and national reports were heard. One of the panel sessions specifically focused on child protection mechanisms, featuring presentations and discussions by both international and local experts.
Participants also explored how digital platforms, including Facebook, TikTok and Instagram, expose children to unregulated and often harmful content.
When it comes to video sharing platforms or big platforms or very large platforms such as Facebook, Instagram or other platforms, TikTok, X, we see there is a very urgent need, and we have to join our forces to regulate this environment, because we usually we say that is a social platform or social media, which means they are media in a certain sense, even the very large platform.
Speakers stressed the need to view children not just as media consumers, but as vulnerable individuals in need of systemic protection.
This time we are actually discussing on the protection of minors, which is one of the core issues that we are all dealing with. I think that this forum is actually the good place to think about it and to envisage our next steps in this field.
The discussion emphasised that protecting children online must go beyond regulating media service providers. It requires holistic strategies combining education, legislation and cooperation.
We have a lot of experience to share and a lot of best practices and why not worst practices to share and not to repeat the same mistakes in our regulatory activity. Online space is full of dangers and dangerous moments and issues, and for children it's very, very difficult to protect themselves from these dangers.
Turkey's RT UK emphasised the importance of building media literacy among both children and parents, with educational programmes already underway. The human rights dimension of child protection was also highlighted by BSEC's first Deputy Secretary General, Turkey's Merve Kavakçı.
Our most important duty is to protect our children from all the harm within media and the vastness of this digital world. These laws will form a chain that extends downward, from national institutions to families, reaching parents as interconnected circles.
Baku's forum also marked the end of Azerbaijan's two-year BRAF chairmanship. Officials confirmed that the 12th BRAF meeting will be held in Albania in the autumn of 2025, with a renewed focus on regional alignment in digital regulation.
And for some culture, Turkey has started a major restoration of Hagia Sophia's iconic dome. The nearly 1,500-year-old Byzantine structure, rich in both Christian and Islamic heritage, remains open to visitors and worshippers during the works.
Hagia Sophia Mosque, standing in the heart of Istanbul, has long been a symbol for both the Muslim and Christian worlds. As a monument that has carried the weight of centuries, Hagia Sophia is now entering a major new phase in its long-running restoration, focusing on its iconic dome. The restoration is considered one of the most significant repair efforts since previous works on the 1,488-year-old structure. Experts say restoring Hagia Sophia is a complex and unpredictable task, but modern technology may open a new chapter in its preservation.
Hagia Sophia was of course destroyed by major disasters and also went through various restorations both in the Byzantine and Ottoman periods. Of course, we do not know the historical records of the very old ones very well, whether they were very comprehensive or not, but since it will be built in the best and most comprehensive way with the technology and methods currently used in the modern age, it probably opens an important page in the book.
Experts report that restoration work on other parts of Hagia Sophia has been ongoing for the past 10 years. The Hagia Sophia is expected to remain open to both worshippers and visitors during the restoration process, which adds complexity to the repairs. The reinforcement project will focus on structural weaknesses identified through earthquake simulations. Given the country's location along active fault lines, experts say the true condition of the structure will become clearer once the lead cover is removed. No official date has been set for the dome's completion due to potential weather and structural delays. Hagia Sophia, built as a Christian church in the 6th century under Emperor Justinian I, was converted into a mosque after the Ottoman conquest in 1453. In 1935, it became a museum under Atatürk, and in 1985, it was recognized as part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In 2020, it was reconverted into a mosque, while remaining open to visitors, reflecting its layered Christian and Islamic heritage.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned to A News.